In previous videos, more or less concluded this build. It just has a couple of final little touches to put on the build, and I wasn't quite sure that was worthy of making a video for. And then I thought, you know what? The little details are often what differentiate a good build from a great build, so I thought I'll go ahead and turn the camera on and show you how I finalized the system. I've already started some of the cable management here on the back, and again, you just sort of start with a group of wires. Doesn't matter wherever you want to start, make sure they're all untangled and not interweaved with other cables, and just start zip tying them, and every cable you zip tie is one less you're going to have to do later. So if you feel intimidated by cable management, if you feel that you're not very good at it, the best way is to just start small. Just cable manage a couple of cables, do that for a few days in a row. If you just do, let's say, 2 cables a day, within the end of the week, you'll have the whole thing cable managed, and it won't seem so frustrating to you by doing it little bits at a time like that. I wish that was my excuse for having to put this off, but no, other work calls. Also wanted to mention that I'm also dealing with a situation right now that I'm considering shutting my shop down, since I'm doing so much from the house now. The economy's starting to change, and the business model is shifting a little bit with regards to what my current customers are requesting, and what I'm able and willing to do. And if I end up closing that down, then there'll certainly be a lot more YouTube videos to make up the revenue that I'll lose from that, although it'll save me revenue on the rent. So anyway, just keeping you in the loop what's going on over here. And yeah, this system is almost done. There was I installed Windows 10 on it, and there was an unidentified device driver. I can't remember what that was, but it's all been since resolved. All the updates have been installed. Everything's been configured as it should be, and it looks like I forgot to turn my camera on. So this is one of the benefits of doing this live. There it goes. And that is, if this was going to be a regular video that I was making, I would have to have started all over again, from the screwed up intro to forgetting to hit the record button on the camera. So at least when you do it live, you guys can see some of the frustration and why sometimes these videos take so long to come out. Sometimes mistakes like that aren't even found until editing, where I'm missing an entire piece and I don't understand. Maybe the piece was only a couple minutes long while the camera's in standby mode. And the reason the camera has a standby mode is it runs off batteries, and if you have the thing not recording and you walk away from it, it saves the batteries, so you're not wasting them. So I may end up also converting this, if I start doing more live stuff, and just turn the auto off function off and just feed the camera as a sort of a dummy camera, if you will, directly into the capture card, and never actually recording it onto the medium card in the camera. That means I don't have to worry about running out of memory. I don't have to worry about running out of battery life. It can be plugged in. And there's a lot of people who want me to do a 24-hour live stream. I might do it. I mean, why not? I mean, I wish there was a charity or a cause or something where you could, I don't know, make it seem like it has more purpose other than just because. But it would be an interesting experiment with regards to the technology, the bandwidth, the operation of all the equipment. These microphone batteries only last about 8 hours. The camera battery only lasts about 5 hours. The memory card will hold about 11 hours. So I'd have to hardwire the camera so I could bypass the memory card, not worry about the batteries, but I'd still have the microphone pack I'd have to change. And so there would definitely have to be little intermissions, probably 10, 15 intermissions, in at least 4 or 5 times in that 24-hour period, where those things could be taken care of, along with bathroom breaks, or I don't know, maybe even eating, although I suppose I could eat live on camera. So food for thought there. If anybody has any ideas regarding that, we'd love to see them in the chat. We got about 221 people in the chat right now. And just finishing up the X99, a lot of people think that this build is obsolete because the X299 was announced officially, last week by Intel. But The X299 doesn't really bring anything to the table that's worth upgrading, not unless you have very specific needs. The different socket, different chip, not so much any performance gain depending on which chip you select. And you know, there's a lot of potential with the X299, but just because you're building with the X299 doesn't mean you're going to get any of that potential versus an X99. So let's just put that to bed right now. The X299 does not automatically make the X99 obsolete. Sometimes the new chipset does just that. In this case, not so much. And of course, it's going to be a lot more money, and anytime new technology comes out, it can be a tough chore to even acquire it because a lot of people want to jump to be first. And then my client would have to wait that much longer. So anyway, X99 does make sense today, regardless if you have the mindset that you have to have the latest of everything, then you have more money and more time than most of us. So for the real people out there, the people that are actual buyers that actually have budgets and want trusted technology and don't want to be pioneers into new technology, still recommending the X99 for those people who need those extra cores, who need those extra PCIe lanes, or need that extra memory to do these very specific tasks that require that. The Zynos build that will be coming up after this build is going to do video editing for me. And with video editing, you can never have too many cores. You can never have too much memory. So that'll be X99 as well. So I just want to get back to the cabling on this. And right now where I've stopped, looks like the video card needs to be done. So the fans. When I hooked this machine up and I went into the BIOS, I found that it was hooked up to one accessory fan and one CPU fan. They're both CPU fans, and it's a little tiny detail that most people wouldn't even notice. I want the fans hooked up, the CPU fans hooked up to the CPU fan port. So there's a port specifically for a CPU fan and for a optional CPU fan. And I'm just one off. So very closely, I don't know how well you can see the connector. It's all the way up at the top. There are 4 fan headers, and the 2 fan headers closest to the CPU are the ones designed for the CPU. So it doesn't matter which of the power cables I move, I just need to move one or the other. They're both right up here. And what I can do is, I see what I did here. There's there's actually 3 fan headers, and then there's a different kind of header next to it. 2 are white and 1 is black. I assume the 2 white ones, this is where me and Asus have our problem. Their engineers think differently than a normal person, than a non-engineer person. So it doesn't make sense to me why I would use 1 black one and 1 white one. To me, both CPU fans should have been the same color on the header. Again, this makes sense to an engineer, but it doesn't make sense to a common person. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to move both these cables over. I only need to move one of them, technically, but I want my cables to look really clean. I don't want one to overlap the other one. So it is a very tight fit in there, however. Let's see if I can get that in there. Come on. Come on now. Fell off. Let's see. There we go. There's the one. And then let's just move the other one over. So I'm going to be on 1 black header and 1 white header. Once again, I'm sure there's an Asus engineer that's going to say that I'm a complete idiot. But I'm telling you that to a common builder, to somebody who's going to build a system like this, things should make an obvious sense. And to have 2 CPU fans, the main one being white and the optional one being black, and then put right next to that an accessory fan that's also white, is beyond puzzling to me. But I should be able to build this using common sense. And common sense is different from an engineer's perspective when they're thinking in terms of board layout and manufacturing design versus end user assumption from clarity of placement and color of parts. And that's where I feel Asus is very, very weak. They they not only practice this, but when you bring it to their attention, they defend it rather than say, thank you for that input, and we will certainly consider that on future builds. We may need to rethink or retrain our engineers or re-guide our engineers into a platform that is more intuitive to the average user, regardless if that makes the engineer's job a little more difficult. So the discussions I've had with Asus, they'll say things like, well, an x99 board is typically not built by an average person. Usually an engineering type would be building it, and they would completely understand. No, that's justifying ignorance. That's all that is. I very much would much rather hear, thank you for bringing that to our attention. That's something that we will definitely consider on future motherboard designs. We want our boards to be very easy to use. We don't want to make people have to rely to reading a very boring, dry technical manual to figure out something as simple as where a CPU fan plugs in. If we can't make that obvious, then we must be doing our job not as good as we can. That's the kind of response I'd like to hear. I don't think I'm ever going to get it. But that is the single biggest complaint I have about Asus, and they do that over and over and over again. They go out of their way to make things more complicated than they need to be because it makes sense to them. Well, if they're the ones buying it and they're the ones building it, that's fine, but they're not. We're the ones buying it and we're the ones building it. If we want to encourage others to accept this hobby or build their own machine, the barrier to entry is the intimidation factor, and we've got to reduce that. We've got to make it simpler. And we're this close. We're this close. How we used to build computers back in the 90s versus how we do it today, it's so much easier today, but there's still that little bit of engineering doofustry, where they just think everybody else is a moron and this is the only way that makes sense technically. You got to remove the technical part of it. You got to make it like Lincoln Logs. You know, you got to color code everything and place everything in a way that makes sense, where manuals should not be required except for more technical issues, such as memory timings or things like that. You know, to know which sockets to plug memory in should be very obvious from looking at the board, but it never is with Asus boards. It is with Gigabyte boards, very easy with Gigabyte boards. I never have to look in a manual on a Gigabyte board to locate where my memory goes. But on an Asus board, different story. Can somebody explain that to me? Can anybody justify why that's acceptable? Because it makes no sense to me. All right, got about 255 people joining us in the chat. I'm just looking through the chat here to see. I do want to remind everybody that the computers you see me build, these are all purchased by customers. There's no sponsors here on this channel. No parts are given to me. And that way I'm free to be honest about what my opinion is overall regarding all the parts without any sort of leaning bias. And there's no computers laying around here that don't belong to somebody. That I'll have people all the time, they'll say, oh, can you send me one? It doesn't work like that. In fact, just shipping this computer will cost about $140 to ship to its owner. So even if it were to be given to you, you'd still have to come up with the shipping price. So this is not a sponsored channel. You guys might want to go to a different kind of channel, one that's got a lot of commercials and in-placement advertising where they do that kind of stuff. I wouldn't do that to you guys. Time's too valuable. And besides, you're much better off building your own. Even if you got one for free, you're better off building your own. All right, so let's just take a look at what I've got left to do here. So I still have the Wi-Fi card to put in. Like I mentioned before, Windows 10 is installed, activated, all the drivers have been put on. And I think I'm just working on finishing up this cable management, which I've already said. Let me just come around here so you can see what I am doing. All right, so these are the USB 3 cables, and I can already see that there's not much I can do with them other than just kind of fold them and push them close to the motherboard tray. We've got a big power cable that's always in the way, no matter what your build is. And you can see how we have this bizarre sort of cable twisting that's going on here. And sometimes it's just a matter of moving the cables around a little bit. Other times you have to unplug the cables and rerun them or reroute them. It only takes a minute, it's not a big deal. So you can already see what's been done previously. The power cable for the hard drive here, I think I can go ahead and tie that up. I just have to decide how I want to do this where it's not going to look too terrible. One of the things you'll see me do sometimes is I'll grab a wire tie. Like I have these green ones, I don't want to use these green ones permanently, so just to temporarily keep myself sane, I'll just wrap some of these cables up to get them out of my way. I'll say like, okay, let's take these for example. Let's just get these out of the way. And it gives me an idea of how thick these cables are going to be. This isn't too bad. This side panel will still close okay. And then I got to figure out what am I going to do with the rest of this. So this can be folded up and placed under here. Usually I don't tighten it down that much. So I'm not worried about that one. This one, same thing. Those can go up and out of the way. This can be tied back. We got a fan cable here that not much I can do with that. However, it does seem like it's going over these cables and it should be going under them. So I'm going to unplug this and reroute it underneath. This is what I'm talking about. If you can think of this stuff when you're building it, then you can save yourself the time later having to do it again. But as you can see, it just takes a moment to unplug, reroute, and plug back in. There we go. And that looks good there. Then when it comes to this video card, I got to think about what's the best way to route this cable. We know all our other power cables are coming out through this hole here, so obviously that's going to keep everything consistent. We'll bring that around. There we go. And we want to bring this back in. I guess it's going to have to come in right about here, yeah. That looks about right. Now when you're doing your cable management and you got a video card like this, it only takes one power connector, but we have two power connectors. And you go, well, should I use the first one or should I use the middle one? And I would say, think about how your cabling is going to look. If it makes sense to use the first one and pull this cable back where you're going to have this connector just sitting out like it's fallen off, that's your decision to make. For me, I would take that end connector and just tie it back and out of the way, and I'll do that right now before I plug it in because it's just easier to work with it that way. And I like to use these, they're basically 4-inch nylon cable ties. And then I have the larger 7-inch cable ties here for the thicker bundles of cables, but most of the computer cables are very small bundles and don't need a cable tie that large. And of course the smaller ones are cheaper, so you don't feel so bad when you screw up and you have to cut one off and throw it in the garbage. And, you know, you get about 100 of them for, I don't know, $3 or $4. And 100 of them should get you through, you know, at least 3 or 4 builds, I would think, depending on the builds. So now that I've done that, let me just get that 4th connector lined up and we'll plug it in right there. There we go. And I don't like how these two cables are separating here, so for visual purposes, I just want to bring them together like so and cut the pigtail off. I kind of almost feel the same way about this connector here. Maybe I can just hide it between the two cables. Something like that. And we're going to push the slack back through. Don't push it too hard. You don't want to break anything. That may be just about it right there. As you can see, it's pretty clean. Even down here, we're still looking pretty clean. Of course, we can wire tie all the power cables together too down there if we want to. We still have this kind of loose fan cable here, which I don't know if sometimes when you do the cable management with a wire tie, you can make it look worse. I don't know if tying that up is going to make it look worse or if it was better off the way it was. I think I'm going to try it. We'll tie it. That's the fan cable coming from this fan that's running down here and plugging into that fan header. Let's just see what it looks like when I cable tie it, if it looks better or worse. There can be other ways to hide cables besides cable tying. There may be a way to run the cable, for example, behind the motherboard and bring it around through the front. I believe I tried that with this motherboard and the cable wasn't long enough to reach. It's kind of a bummer when they put things like the front port audio and other headers on this corner where there's no real easy access. You know, if they made the case just about a ½ inch taller, even a ¼ inch taller, and just gave me a little gap between the bottom of the motherboard and the top of the power supply, that would sure make the cable management look a lot better. Of course, you'd also end up with a case that's a little bit taller. So that looks pretty good. We've got these cables to deal with as well. These are the two cables powering these two fans that you just saw me move over. And where you run into kind of an issue here is if I line them up here and zip tie them, I'm going to end up with some slack right there. No, I'm not sure you can see that, which I don't like. If I line it up here to get rid of the slack here, then I end up with the slack over here. It's got to go somewhere. Or maybe perhaps I can just give the wire a little twist and make it try to simulate the length of the other cable. But once again, this appears to be easier said than done. That actually doesn't look too bad. Folding both cables up close to each other and just use one zip tie. Times like this, I wish I had a cameraman that could kind of move around me so you guys could get a better look at what I'm doing. But it is what it is. All right, let's see here. Come on now. Well, you know what? I'm going to have to do each one individually, which probably makes more sense anyway from a maintenance standpoint if anybody has to take one fan off. Shouldn't have to make them undo both, right? So we'll do that one first, and then as I'm tying it, I can pull on the cable, make sure I'm taking up as much slack as possible. Once again, we'll get that pigtail out of here. Give me another one of these. We're going to do the same thing up here. Well, that's interesting. That came all the way over here. Very interesting. All right. We can work with that. Just want to do the same thing. We'll run it just like so. It doesn't help to be in this tightly confined space between the top of the heatsink and the bottom top of the case, the bottom top of the case. Did I just say that? There we go. Okay, well that takes care of the slack problem, but is it visually appealing becomes sort of the next question here. I really don't want to get these things too close to that back heatsink that's on the VRMs, the voltage regulator modules. I want those to be able to cool off nicely, so I think that's going to have to be good enough. Most CPU fans aren't going to have two like that. To me, it's a little off-putting to have two there. Might be able to just kind of tuck it in behind. Maybe. That may be actually a very good solution. There we go. That's a lot better, much better. Just tuck those cables behind the heatsink to hide them, and it's not really going to affect any negative part of the cooling. All right, so I think the front looks pretty good. Now I can focus once again on the back of the case. Remember, I'm not cutting that pigtail off because that green one's just meant to be temporary. It's a good excuse for me to get rid of the green ones. I don't like the green ones. I don't want to use them. So to use them to temporarily hold your cables in place is a good resolution to that. So one of the things I'm noticing right now is the way this power cable comes in. It's joining the rest of the power cables here, and then it goes over what is the front port audio cable here. And it overlaps. You see how it overlaps? My preference is that none of the cables overlap, but that means I have to unplug this and move it around this cable right here. So I'm going to do that now because it's bugging me. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about with cable management, that there's no real rules to it. It's a very difficult thing to teach because you just want it to look aesthetically pleasing. Some people are more meticulous than others when it comes to that. I'm certainly not a leader in that arena, that's for sure. But I make it the way I would want it to be. I build the computers for my customers no differently than I build them if I were building it for myself, to every last detail. So now, we run that down like so. There we go. Now we should be able to take this cable and figure out a way to tie it to these others, while at the same time taking up this slack that we've got here. How do we consume that slack? I don't want it to be pushed out through the front because that's going to be more obvious that way. I might not have a choice. You don't want that cable too tight, especially when shipping, because if things move around and that cable is really tight, it could break the cable. So keep that in mind when you're doing your cable management as well. If you're going to be shipping the computer or moving it around a lot, you do want to have a little bit of play in your cables. So instinctively what I want to do is I just want to take this and pull it up and fold it and take that slack up, which actually looks like a pretty good solution for right now. So I think I'm going to grab another green, my last green one here, and let's take a look at what that's going to look like. Yeah, I think that back panel's still going to close okay. Once again, this could be pulled up like that, and this one can be pulled up like that. That's going to clean that. This fan cable, there's not a whole lot we can do with it. You know, we could sort of give it a little bit of a fold just to remove some of the slack, but it just seems like it just interferes no matter what I do. It doesn't seem to be any real easy way to hide it, but we can get rid of a little bit of the slack. You will be using a lot of wire ties. Usually on most builds, I'd estimate somewhere around 40 is what I use, between ones I screw up and I have to cut off, and you know, from starting to finishing. And again, depends on the build, depends on the size of the case. Smaller computers, when you deal with micro ATX or mini ITX, you typically don't have the length of cables. And because of the limitations of the case size, you don't have as many cables. So you'd obviously then use fewer cable ties in that instance. There we go. And then this hard drive power, this really bothers me that, you know, a specific cable had to be run just to power that hard drive. And that's why I always recommend, if you can just go with a large solid state drive, pay a little extra money, get the bigger solid state drive, your cabling is going to be so much better, and your reliability is going to be better, because these mechanical drives, they all fail. The solid state drives will fail too, but I haven't seen one fail yet. And I've been installing them now, gosh, it's been 5 or 6 years. I have not seen a dead solid state drive. But sooner or later, this will die, and it'll probably die before anything else. Well, maybe a fan. Fans are the most likely thing to die first, and then the hard drives would be the second most likely thing to die. Just in time. I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but when there's a failure, it's likely to be one of those two things. And whether it's the fan on your power supply or the fan on your case, especially here in Arizona where we've got so much dust, fans are one of the first things to go, so the fewer fans, the better. Of course, the fewer fans, the quieter too. All right, so if we wire this one up like this, how's that going to look? Is that going to work? We take that. Plus we have this excess. So now I kind of have an idea of what I want to do. So I can cut that one free. And I'm going to replace it with a black wire tie of the same size. There we go. And what I'm thinking is we want to bring this up like this. I want to bring this one up like that. And we want to bring this one up like this. But that cable tie is not going to reach that far down, so I'm going to have to come down here, change my plan a little bit. Once again, this, I don't know, this one won't be temporary, I don't think. I think this one's going to be a keeper. How's that? I want to squish all these down here and push them up to get the slack up into the loop. Push it up against the back of the tray. Take all that slack. And then I can tighten this down. Let's take the other green one off. I don't need that anymore. There we go. Now, I think that looks pretty good. You can grab another one. I always look for the little wire loops or the little bridges for the wire ties. Some cases have them, some cases don't. Some cases have a few, some cases have a lot. This case actually does really good, except they don't have any wire bridges anywhere from here over. So it took a little bit of creativeness to figure out how I was going to attach that cable. So I ended up going through what appears to be a mounting mechanism for a drive bay or something that this didn't come with, I guess. Whatever, as long as it holds the cable, that's all I care about. But be aware, some cases are designed like that. They're not all the same, they're not all equal. So when you choose a case, these are things you might want to consider. If cable management is important to you, you might have to sacrifice perhaps a case that you actually visually find more appealing for a case that has the cable management options that are also important to you on the inside of the case. So it's all part of the decision-making process when you're designing your own computer. Don't just look at the looks of the case, but what are the features or limitations? And that's not just regarding your hardware, right? It's also regarding cable management and the ease or pain in the butt in which the case can be to open or close, especially if you have a big bundle of cables right there behind your panel, rear panel. Because as you can see, that's going to stick out quite a bit, right? That panel has got to go on here, and these cables are going to have to be flush. And when you have these large power connectors, they're not going to give. You just sort of have to figure out a way to get everything to sit, hopefully, flush enough for that side panel to fit on there. I'm just really curious right now if I can fit that side panel on there, because it looks pretty good to me like that. So I'm going to lay the case flat. Let's get rid of these nylon zip ties that I've cut away. And let me get the side panel, which I have somewhere. Here we go. Here we go. All right. What's going on in chat? All right. Well, this is the fun part. Look at look at how thick that bundle of cables are, right? Is this going to be a problem, or am I going to be able to push it down at all? And this is one of the things you deal with when you pick a case, is what's the depth for the cable management? Because if the depth isn't good enough, what that means is you're going to have to cable manage a bit differently. What I mean by that is what I've done is I bundled all the cables together into one bundle, and based on what I'm seeing with this cover, I'm going to have to make two bundles. I'm going to have to split that because the one bundle's just too large. I'll have to move one over to the side, or, well, this is see-through, so people can see that. I guess I'm going to have to move it over to the back of the motherboard side. And it looks like there's plenty of room there for cable management, but this thing does not even want to come close to being put on. Not even close. It's been a while since I've got one that bad. I guess I'm a little out of practice. But this is why you can expect to use a number of cable ties. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's just a process of figuring out what's going to look the best and work the best. So let me pull a couple of these out here. And where I'm having the problem primarily is up here at the top. So I'm going to need to separate some of this. And when you cut your cable ties free, be very, very careful. It's easy to cut through your cables, and then that's going to just be a bad, bad day once that happens. So see, like these here, in my opinion, these can all go together. It's this power cable that's giving me the biggest issue. Let me cut that free. Let's take another look at this. What I would like to do is separate this large power cable from the rest of the batch because it is so thick. Just have it come in on its own over here. Let's push that down. And you see I've already flattened that out. This power connector is hitting the back of these cables. I mean, that power connector is going to have to, you know, either be pushed up and out of the way. It's pushing itself back against the motherboard. That looks a lot better to me, but I don't know that I can still bundle them. They'd almost have to be sort of side by side like this, which makes it a bit more challenging to cable that way. But the wire ties are cheap, so just experiment with it. Like I said, there's no real right or wrong answer here. And I'm sorry if I'm blocking some of your view, but I really need to see what I'm doing here. Let's see what this looks like. Try and get that as flat as we can. Get it around that power connector, stretch them out, and then tighten it down that way. Okay. That feels better. But if it's better in reality, I don't know yet. And I have this. I see what's happening here. This big motherboard cable really needs to. Let me take that off. Feels like it's a little intertwined here. Maybe I need to take it away from. See how it's crossed over here? It may fit better and be easier to manipulate if I take it off. And again, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. It's a very tight fit to get in there. And then the second challenge will be putting it back on again. Of course, I can always take it off from the motherboard, the power supply side as well. So if we take this, and then the question is, how about that other cable? Do I run it? I can see what my dilemma is there. I guess that's going to be the right way. Just run it in like that. Just like so. Now, see if I can plug that 24-pin power connector back on. It's not easy. This is a tight fit. That's why it helps if you could think of this stuff as you're building it so you don't have to go back and do this. However, it also depends, like I said, just on how finicky you are over how important the case looks on the inside and what your definition of that is. So I'm going to take these cables right here and I'm going to tie those up just to get them out of the way. Come on. There we go. Okay, that looks a lot better. Definitely not as big as a wad of cables as it was, but of course I still have this one to deal with too. How am I going to do that? This one could go down here, actually. Yeah, I think that's the way to do this one. Is we run this one on the bottom. And the way I would do that is by folding it down here and then seeing if I can just tuck it. Yeah, that's probably going to be the best way. So what I'll do then, just to make it a little cleaner, is I'll just make sure these loops on the end get squished down a bit by putting a wire tie on each end, because I just think it looks better. And of course, if the user wants to add more hard drives later on, apart from running the SATA cable, you know, the power cable's already there for them. So it'd be real easy to work on this in the future. That's the other thing when you're doing your cable management. It's not just about the looks, it's about how much easier the system's going to be to diagnose or replace a bad part if you've got to remove some cables or replace some cables without having to undo all of your cables or redo the entire cable management. If everything's done in sort of individually at first and then bundled together in sets afterwards where appropriate. So that cable's probably about as good as that one's going to be right there, I guess. And then we've got these power cables here. This one's for the video card. And part of me is thinking it would match better with the main power cable if it came up and went through the same process. So I might be putting it back the way I had it originally. I'm not sure now. Things start getting confusing after you start moving around a few cables. And it's okay. Just keep doing what makes sense at that particular time. You will eventually get there. And if you get frustrated with it, you know, it all doesn't have to be done right now. Do a little bit at a time. Take a break. Take a couple days off if you need to, till you're in the mood for it again. Because one thing that doesn't go together is neatness and frustration. Okay. Now we can pull the slack through. So now my question is, what do I do with it? Now what? Seems to me we can grab this cable here, run it. We've got a wire tie bridge there. And I got to be conscientious over how thick I make these bundles of cables together. So if I separate that away from the rest of them, let's see what it looks like. It's a lot of experimentation here, just a lot of trial and error. That's good. You see, I'm basically now just left with two ugly cables, right? And before I take that any further, let me just see if the back will go on it now, or if I still have to work on this. Is this low enough yet? There's just no way to know without trying. Ideally, this is going to fit. Yeah. Much better, much better. You'll see here, didn't go in the groove. And if you don't correct problems like that, and if you end up putting the screws in it, now it didn't connect up at the top, then the metal will, over time, it'll start to form into that shape, and even when you do put the screw in later on when you get around to it, it may never look right. No, now I'm missing the middle. Now I'm missing that end. I just have to put weight down across the entire surface of it. That's all in. But now this side's not in up here. Oh, middle didn't go in. Wow. How about now? I think we got it. No, it doesn't feel like that side's in right there. Now that side's in and this side's not in. So as you see, you're not the only one who struggles with that stuff. A lot of us do. And when I put the pressure down on the front, then it's taking pressure off the back. It's almost like a two-person job to hold it down across the middle, the front, and the end, and slide it forward in order to make sure everything lines up as it should. That feels pretty close. It's hard to tell if that middle one is not in or not. I can't really tell. I guess that was in. Anyway, that gives us the confirmation we need that the wiring now is flat enough. So I can just finish those last two cables. Bring that back up. Spin it around. For some people that's good enough. For me it's not. The problem is, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have any wire bridge ties here. There's none there. So how do I make this look good? I'm thinking, these can go side by side next to this bundle. That's the video power, and then this is motherboard power. Then I end up with this big kind of lump on the bottom. So as far as cable management goes, this case is not very good for cable management. This is the, this was the Corsair 300. I got to remember what it is now. This is a Corsair, yeah, it's a 300R. Had to go look at the box. And given the difference between the 300R and the 200R, I think the 200R is much better, even though this is a more expensive case. I mean, the 200R, you're still going to have the same number of ports. You have more clearance for a liquid cooler on the 300R. That's about it, really. I think this customer would have been better off with a 200R personally. But this is what they wanted. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to build it so I know. How else are you going to know, right? So here's something else I can try. I can take these cables together. What if we took all three of these? That's going to look very good. Well, there's a point right there that I want to save. So this may not be a permanent wire tie. I just need something to hold that so I can kind of visualize this better. Now what I need is something to pin these back here. And I suppose I could use another one of these that I used here. That's not what they're for. It's not what they're intended for. And it's a shame that I have to, that they're not giving me any choice. Apparently, the engineer who designed this case never really thought about cable management other than just jamming the cables in the back. Because yes, you can jam your cables in the back and have them hidden. But that doesn't make it easy to work on, and you certainly wouldn't want to show anybody the back of it. Because had the engineer who designed this case thought of that, I would have gotten more wire loops over here. There's no reason to not give them to me. It's not like they have to sacrifice anything. It's just in the way the machine punches out the plate. And they failed to add those hooks. I don't know if it's an oversight, if it's done with intention. I'd like to know what the intention is. I mean, there's no harm in having hooks you're not going to use, but needing hooks you don't have can be a serious aesthetics problem. I'm trying to get this wire tie to get through the other side of the loop. Come on. It shouldn't be this difficult. And once again, if it had the wire ties, you wouldn't see me struggle, or with the wire bridges, to just feed in the nylon tie like I am right now. Come on. Gotcha. All right. So now, should be able to wrap those two there. And I want to push them as far to the right as possible. So another problem is there's a great big wire wrap on the end of this connector, and it's preventing the connector from bending. So it's very rigid right here. So if I just say, okay, fine, you want to be pushed out a little more, let's push you out a little more. And let's cut off that pigtail and that pigtail. Now, that is not the cleanest wire management I've ever done, but given how much I've had to work with and what the case allows, I don't know. Personally, I don't know how I can do much better than that. Some of you, perhaps many of you, have ideas of maybe running the cables. Well, there's no lip up here to hide them here. There is a lip here, but there's nothing to keep the cable in that lip. Then, of course, this cable here, which is its own little problem because of those hard plastic connectors that prevent the, at least a cable can give a little bit, but the connector won't give at all. So sometimes you can just kind of push the connectors in a way that they sit flush. Now the big question is, can I still get that back panel on? Because I believe that cable management is done. Let me just take another look at the front, see what it looks like. We've got these two cables coming off the USB 2 or USB 3 front port header that bothers me, so I just want to pinch them together. Just more visually appealing. There we go. That's being fed in that way. I think that's about as good as it's going to get. Still, it is going to be a lot easier to work on that way. Take my extra cable ties, put them all together so I know where they are for the next build. There we go. I think it looks pretty good. At least the cables are all black and the wire ties are all black. That at least makes it look a little better. And the fact that there is some organization to it, even if it's not picture perfect. Nobody's really going to see this backside anyway, except whoever works on it. Now, let's try this one more time. Ooh, it's got a little bit of a bubble. That's not bad, that's normal. Push down, Keep it flat, slide it forward. No, middle didn't go in. Top didn't go in. I think I got it that time. This side's definitely in. I have a hard time telling right here for some reason. There's no cables up here, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't expect there to be a fitment issue there. I would expect it down here. Down here is perfect. I think it's awfully close if it's not in there. It's really hard to tell. These cases sometimes aren't manufactured to that level of perfection anyway. And it's nothing I usually notice until after I've built the computer, how the fitment is. It's not often I'm taking the back panel off an empty case and putting it back on again and then feeling for how it clips into place. I'm guessing that's about normal. There does feel like there's something right there. So rather than be lazy about it, I'm just going to take it off and take a quick look in there. I do see there's the catch and there's the slot. Sometimes the case itself can get a little bent. These little rails that it connects into, so I watch for that. I also want to make sure that these power connectors for the hard drive aren't getting in the way. I've also noticed I've got a little dust on the inside of this case. Let me take care of this dust. Make that nice and clean before we put it together. Weight along both sides. Come on. Something just feels wonky. Seems like it went in straight. That feels pretty good. So I go back to my motherboard box and I should have the case screws in here. It's, like I say, having everything in one place. Even if it's a big pile, still makes it easier to find than wondering where it is. I know it's somewhere in here. Oh, there's one. And there's two. All right, there's two of them. So let me go ahead and secure this back panel into place, and then let's make sure it still turns on. Perfect, thank you. Set this back aside. There we go. That's what it's looking like right now. What am I missing in the chat? Am I missing anything? You know, there's only a certain amount of manipulation you can do with your cable management depending on the parts you've selected. And you know, like I say, some people don't really care. They just want it to work and work reliably. And other people, it's the whole world to them. But that's why, you know, people that want that level of work done where every single wire has to look pristine and perfect need to do it themselves, because that kind of person is never going to be happy until they do it themselves. And what I've often found with people that have that mentality that, you know, what I did isn't good enough for them, I often find that they themselves have substandard wiring. Like I'll look at their stuff on a rare occasion where somebody may criticize, you know, the work that I'm doing, and I'll look at the work they've done, and I'll say, well, how come you didn't do this? And they say, well, it was good enough. Well, not for me, it's not. So that goes both ways. So I would encourage anybody who has any problem personally with the way I build computers to make a video and show me how to do it. Or just do it yourself, but don't be a jerk, come on. It's a pretty good wiring job, especially considering what I had to work with. And you saw how much time it took to do that. If I want to spend a week playing around with the cables and buying extensions, and the customer wants to reimburse me for all the time that'll take, it's certainly an option. But it in no way impairs the functionality of the computer. And more importantly, it makes it much, much easier to work on this computer, to upgrade it or repair it in the future, simply by segmenting those cables, taking up the slack, and separating them out. So it's unfortunate I have to address sort of rude comments like that from people who jump in and sort of want to be elitist snobs about it. This channel isn't really for people like that. It's really intended for everyday builders, and to let them know things don't have to be perfect, and don't let people like that get to you. And just do the best job you can, and if you ever want to go back and retackle it, think you can do a better job in the future, it's fine. It's not going anywhere. And more importantly, just don't have the cables all hanging out loose and snagging potentially on anything when you close the cover, or getting trapped in a fan, that sort of thing. And of course, sometimes you're just trapped by your case, and it may be worthwhile at some point in the future to buy a better case for that kind of cable management and move all of your equipment over into it and build something more simple into the more limited case. So, but everything's workable. Everything can be fixed, and everything can be made, you know, to look pretty good. But if you're looking for perfection, that is really something that requires a lot of time, and a professional repair shop or building shop just isn't going to spend that much time on one computer. Couldn't sustain a business that way unless that one computer was worth a whole lot of money. So anyway, what else we got going on here? Carey, do you go to Radio Shack? I used to work at Radio Shack back in the 1980s. Those Radio Shacks have all closed up. All right, well, I see the majority of folks there in the chat are agreeing that cable management's not terrible. But you know, again, I'm limited to what I can do, and given this case and those parts, I think that's going to be about it. I need to turn the computer on, make sure it still works before I go any further. So I'm going to grab the monitor here. We're going to use this keyboard and mouse. I'm going to step around, and we'll see how long it takes to boot. We'll go through that whole routine. I think I'll move this over here, and move this over here, and then let me grab my monitor. Maybe that'll see if it'll reach. I think it'll reach. There we go. I'll plug the DVI cable in. You know, a mistake I see a lot of people make when they're building a computer is they plug the video card into, or they plug the monitor into the wrong video card. They'll plug it into onboard video rather than the video card, and they email for support. They go, I just built a computer, I did everything the way you said, and it doesn't turn on. And usually they've got it plugged in the wrong video card, or they failed to give the motherboard all the power it needs. They only hooked up one connector instead of two connectors, or they failed to plug power into the video card. These are very, very common. You get these questions all the time. So I mention it so you guys hopefully will plant a seed that if you're building a new computer and it doesn't turn on right away, check the easy things. You probably didn't seat a cable fully or forgot to seat it entirely. This motherboard, because it's x99, does not support built-in video, so that's not even an issue for us. I need to get a power cable, though, for me to turn this on. So let me go grab that. And you'll see how long the boot up time on this, the BIOS, the UEFI takes a bit longer on an x99, but once it actually starts to load the OS, it's pretty quick, as it should be. I mean, it's a brand new machine. My goal today is to get this wrapped up and end this video so I can go take this to the FedEx store and get it off to the customer. This one I think is going to Tennessee, which isn't too far from Arizona. It's not like shipping it across the country. Those ones I ship across the country make me really nervous. Okay. I'll plug in the USB up here. We can test the front USB ports that way. And I'm going to need my other mouse because that one's still hooked up to the other one. All right, let's see what happens. Let's turn that on. Let's turn this on. There's no internet connected here. We're just running the bare minimum, which is power, keyboard, mouse, and the monitor cable. That's it. I just want to make sure that it will boot into Windows 10 as it should. You'll see we don't even have any acknowledgement from the monitor yet. There we go. That's how long it took just to get to that screen. That's kind of an x99 thing. I don't know if you want to count that as your boot up time, because for me, boot up time doesn't start until just then. As you start seeing little circles spinning around, now it's loading the operating system. We verify the hard drive LED is working. It's flashing on and off. Power LED is on. I'll know if these two USBs work, if my mouse and my keyboard work. So there's the keyboard. I am having some weird problem with this mouse. There it is. I am going to throw this mouse out. I have about had it. I don't know what is going on. It's driving me crazy. Maybe I've just worn it out. It's the strangest thing. I do have a hunch. That maybe the connector inside of the mouse has been bent through my daily abuse. And let me get a small screwdriver. It's a last-ditch attempt to try and fix that mouse before it hits the trash can. It's only a $12 mouse, so it's not like it's really worth my time to try and fix, but sometimes it's just a matter of principle. It's not a good enough reason to not work, you know? It's got to be a good reason for me to dispose of it and replace it, regardless of its cost. So there's little metal connectors in here, and I think if I... Oh, I see. It's it's gone. The little metal connector that the top of the battery connects to inside of here, I just saw it fall down inside. And that would certainly explain the problem then. Wow. And these batteries, they fit in here so tightly, I'm sure it probably pushed it down. And you can usually open these mice up pretty easily. I see there's just one screw right there. If I'm throwing it away anyway, I got nothing to lose, right? Can't make it any worse. So let's take a quick look here. See what's going on under the hood. See if I can access that metal piece and push it back. Chances are it's just going to slide back down again, so it would need to be glued or, you know, set in a way that it's not going to pop back out. It looks like that's the only screw, and that this blue part should come off. Well, I'm going to break it because I don't know how it comes off. And it appears even if I remove this piece, I'm still not going to have access to getting underneath of it. And I need to get under the mouse. And I don't see... Oh, you know what? There's a reason why it's a $12 mouse. They are slapped together in an assembly process that is not about anything other than efficiency. It's not really meant to be fixed. I think under these feet there are some screws. And then once I pull the feet off, it'll be hard to slide it around on the table. So I'm done with it. I'm not even gonna. We're done. Good riddance. I have a lot of mice. I'm gonna grab a different one. Once again, when you're watching something live, you get to see all this stuff happen. When you're seeing something that's been recorded and edited, all of this would have been cut out. And this all just eats up your time. And you're just sitting there and you're going, man, I filmed all day today and I got 20 minutes of usable footage. Why? Well, it's stuff like this that can cause that. So this one, I think I can program this one. It's the same thing on this one. You can see that metal piece right there. It's right on the inside there. And that piece had fallen down inside. And there probably are screws underneath these 4 pads, but then it'd have to glue the pads. It's just not worth it for $12. Not doing it. There we go. Now this isn't automatically going to be connected to the unifying receiver. I've got to load the Logitech software to do that. So I actually have to put this on my other machine temporarily so I can pair them together. So let me do that right now. Let's go ahead and put this back over here. And see if I can get my monitor cable to reach the other PC that I'm streaming with. It's going to be a tight fit. I don't think it's going to reach. Ooh, just barely. Okay, so now you guys will see the stream as I see it here on the screen. I can't use it. Such a bad habit. Okay, so what I need to do, you can kind of get an idea what the delay is here. What I need to do is go into the Logitech Setpoint software. So let's just go to Logitech. We go to the Logitech website. We want to go to the Setpoint. Usually there's a search, mice and keyboards, support. Here we go. Support and downloads is what I want. I don't think I already have the software. Pretty sure I don't. Let me just type Logitech and see if anything comes up. Logitech Unifying software. Well, that's what I want. Okay, well that's another way to get there. That was a bit faster. We want it for Windows 10. I don't think there's a 64-bit option. No. Download now. Windows 10. There it is. This says OS Windows 8, 7, Vista, XP or older. It doesn't even say 10. That's fine. We'll take it. Should work. I'm just going to hit run on that. Yes, I want to run the setup. Agree to the license agreement. Hit install. Click finish. And it says to start the device you want to connect. Oh, maybe this one's not compatible. Oh, there it is. Yes. Boom. Works. Now I see I've got both mice are paired to this now, so I can fight back and forth with it. I'm going to go ahead and turn this mouse off and put it away. I like this mouse better. Now that I've done that, whoops, I just closed out my YouTube. I'll go back into that again. Oh, don't tell me this is doing the same thing. Okay, back into live stream so I can see what you guys are doing here. There we go. All right, so back into YouTube here. So I can go ahead and disconnect this monitor again and plug it back into the X99 rig. I just love that unifying software. It just makes it so painless. And again, because Logitech is not a sponsor, you know what I'm telling you is honest. Not being manipulated in any way with my opinions. Plug that back up here. And then inside of the mice, you can, in most wireless mice, if you don't already know, you can often store your wireless dongle. And that can be put away. All right, now, we can just verify everything on this PC is correct. We're looking at 32 gigs of RAM, an Intel Core i7-6900K running at 3.2 gigahertz. Want to look at the device manager, make sure that everything looks like it's supposed to. We've got no yellow exclamation points. Want to visually inspect that all of our fans are turning as they should. I can already see these two CPU fans are turning, rear case fan is turning. Gonna have to duck your head under. These two fans are not turning because we are not working the graphics card. Don't think your graphics card is broken. It may also be the same on the power supply. Some power supply fans don't turn until it gets hot enough to justify the fan to turn. And then we've got the one other fan up front. I can't spin this anymore, I'm hitting the monitor, but the fan up front is spinning as it should. So that means there's just one thing left to do on this build, and that is to install the Wi-Fi card. So let's go ahead and do that now. A lot of people think if you add a Wi-Fi card, you get Wi-Fi. It doesn't work that way. You've got to have Wi-Fi to get. You know, you can have a radio station on an island, and you're not going to pick up any radio stations broadcasting unless a radio station broadcasts on the island that you've got the radio. Well, that's all Wi-Fi is. A lot of people don't seem to understand that. There's still a big misconception that Wi-Fi is everywhere, or virtually everywhere, and that by adding a Wi-Fi card you can have internet access. You've got to have a Wi-Fi router, or you've got to be somewhere where Wi-Fi is close enough to you to access it and have permission to access that Wi-Fi. And then whether or not you want to go with an internal card or you want to go with something USB, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, it's really up to you. I prefer an add-in Wi-Fi card because Wi-Fi is always being upgraded and improved. So if you get a motherboard with built-in Wi-Fi, over time that Wi-Fi will become obsolete and may not be able to keep up with your needs. If the motherboard has PCI Express slots, you'll always be able to add a PCI Express internally or a USB, but you'll never be able to remove the one built in. The best you can do is disable it. And that's kind of a pain in the butt when you constantly have to disable your Wi-Fi every time your BIOS gets reset or something, and then you don't know which Wi-Fi adapter's which when you've got two. It can get really confusing. So this is the Asus, what is this? This is the PCIe AC55BT, so that sure has Bluetooth on it. PCIe lanes to the CPU. Generally speaking, I like to look for, you know, this is just PCI Express -1, and it'll work in any slot, even the bigger slots this will fit in. But I don't want to waste the bigger slot. So my preference will be to put it right there, and in doing so, it may actually do pretty good to better hide that cable, or there may be, yeah, see now, that cable I just managed is too tight. So I'm going to have to cut that, or, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm going to cut it. Cut that wire tie very carefully, not to cut the cable. And that's going to go back just right here. It's got 3 fan headers right here. These are all chassis fan headers. Since I'm going to have to use one of these USBs, I'm going to move this USB connector here over to the right so that the one coming from this card won't have to overlap. Just makes more logical sense. And then with regards to figuring out which of these panels I have to remove, it's the second one from the bottom. There we go. You'll see there's a little knockout right here, and that's for cables to run into that. That's what that's there for. And that way you don't pinch your cable and cause an electrical short, which would probably ruin your day. Well, that sits in there nice, just like it should. We can lock that back down. Perfect. And then we've got the USB cable here. And both ends of this cable are identical. It doesn't matter which end you use. There's a little notch, so it only plugs in one way. And that's going to go one there. And we can kind of route this under here, plug it in right there. Not done. This we're going to keep. Go back to the motherboard box here. Let's see what we got. This can go back in. We've got the armor now we can apply. I know there was spare armor. Here it is. And with this motherboard, and this is kind of unusual for this design, other motherboard manufacturers make boards of this level, but we've got these pieces of plastic. They're plastic covers, including even these fake RAM modules that can sit into the sockets if you're into that. I am not going to remove that heatsink to put those on because nobody's going to see them anyway with the heatsink in the way. We've got 3 of these that we need, and they give us 4. And they're just going to plug in sort of like Tupperware lids. Let's go this way. There we go. So like this large one right here, and this large one right here, and this medium-sized one. The little one we don't need because that's where the Wi-Fi card is. And these just slide into the groove of where a card would normally go. They don't click in or anything like that. They just gently press in. Same with this smaller one that's going to go way up here. It's got an interesting design in that if you push on the front of it, it kind of pops it out. So I hope those don't break free in shipping. I'm a little worried about that. They're not going to cause any damage if they do, but they could cause a little bit of a concern for the customer if they hear something rattling around when their computer arrives. There's 2. Will that lock it in? I wouldn't be that lucky, would I? No. And then the last one will go down here. So it's a really nice clean look in there. You don't see any of those exposed ports. With that done, these can go back in this bag. Yeah, I suppose if you had a liquid cooler or something where you could see the RAM, it would make sense to put those dummy RAM modules in the empty sockets, but really personal preference. Okay, move this back out of the way. You'll always see I'm moving things around to try and keep my work area as clean as possible. It's easy to accidentally knock things over or to misplace something. Okay, that looks pretty good. I just want to deal with these last couple wire management issues here. I thought I was done with my wire management. And the best I can do on these is just take up the slack, find a way to fold the cable in a way that it won't look too bad. What I can actually do on this one is I can actually take this cable off. It'll be a lot easier to do it this way. And just try and bring the loops as close to the ends of the connectors, because that's about the length of cable I actually need. And if I don't over tighten it, it should allow me to pull on it a little bit. If it's too tight, I can just pull the cable and give myself a little more slack. Here we go. Here we go. I like it when I can pull the cable off and do the cable management like this, because then I can really get a much better view on what I'm doing, and I don't have the confined workspace. I don't know what I did with my wire cutters now. Thought I left them out. Are they right in front of my face? Oh, they're underneath my keyboard. Okay. So once again, connectors on the bottom. Doesn't matter which side you use. Go underneath this one and right onto there. And then when it comes to this fan header, kind of the same situation where I can take the fan header off and sort of loop it here. Kind of guesstimating where the cable has to go. I can use a bigger loop than that. This should be my final cable tie. All right. Bingo. And then that can go right back on here. It is dark in there. It's hard to see where the pins are. Sometimes getting a flashlight out may be necessary depending on your work environment. Just know that that's normal. Still think the cables look pretty good in there for what we had to work with. You know, regardless of what case we would have selected, we still would have these cables here to deal with. You're never going to get it perfectly clean and perfectly spotless unless you get you know, one of those cases that has the plastic cover that goes over this area, and then it'll hide that. But you know what else hides it? Putting the panel back on, at least on this case. All right, now we can fire it up one more time, make sure those drivers get loaded for that Wi-Fi card, which will probably happen automatically through Windows 10, but just in case it doesn't, here in the box with the documentation, there's a bracket for a lower profile, like server style case, like a 1U, 2U case. And then there's our driver disk, which we can load. And the rest of this can go right there. This is the antenna. I don't want to take the antenna out of the bag. We're just going to leave that alone. Customer can do that when they get it. Let me just plug the monitor back in, and let's plug power back in, and let's go ahead and load the driver. And then we'll just make sure I can see all available Wi-Fi networks in my area. If I can, obviously the Wi-Fi is working. I don't need to test it any more thorough than that. make sure I didn't knock any cables loose in the process, make sure all the fans are turning. People, again, a very common mistake, you go in, put your hands in that case, things are very tightly compacted together, and you end up knocking something loose, don't even realize you did it. So even though we've already checked our power light and hard drive light, check those things again, double check, triple check, quadruple check, everything you can think of. We're still using these USB ports intentionally. I know the ones on the back of the motherboard are going to work. So I want to make sure that these work, want to make sure the card reader works, eliminate any potential problem that the customer may have when the customer receives it. You know, plug a set of headphones into the front, make sure the front audio jack is working. All this just takes a moment. All right, so we're back up and running. I already see the Wi-Fi device comes up, and then the list of Wi-Fi networks appears. Just automatically, no driver is even necessary. That's good. So I'm not going to load the driver because sometimes the driver can create problems. What I'm going to do now is take the Wi-Fi parts here, which is the driver, the manual, the warranty, the antenna, and that's all going to go back in this motherboard box with the documentation. I'll just set it on top. Well, no, you know what? I want the paperwork to be with all the other paperwork. I want the driver disk with the other driver disks. And the antenna can just go anywhere. The antenna is pretty obvious. In the box, this is all the documentation, the spare parts for the liquid cooler, the extra thermal compound, the extra velvet bag that the power supply came with, extra cables, bridges for SLI, for dual video cards, these ports that the covers we've removed, the screwdriver that the heatsink came with. Keep it all in one box, one place. It's going to make your life so much easier if you follow that advice. What I'll also often do is write the customer's name on the box along with the month and the year, so we get an idea of how old the machine is. People very quickly forget how time flies. Didn't you just build that computer for me? Yeah, I built it like 7 years ago. Well, that can't be right. And you look it up and got to find the receipt. Versus if it's just written on there, that conversation never even takes place. Now it is ready for the final button up. Everything looks really good. If we want to run some graphics benchmarks on it, we could certainly do that now. One of the, I'm not connected to the net. You know what? I'm not going to do it because then I got to connect to the internet. Everything is working. There's the C drive, which is a terabyte solid state, M.2, and then there's the 4 terabyte hard drive. Whenever you install a drive other than your main C drive, if you're going to install like a storage drive, you do have to go into the control panel and you have to initialize and format that disk, which I've already done. Once again, one more look in the device manager. Let's make sure. Well, we do have an unknown device right here. And I am going to have to connect this up to the internet. I already know what this is. The Wi-Fi card isn't just Wi-Fi, it's Bluetooth as well. And how come our optical drive isn't working? Did I knock the power cable loose? Yeah, that's exactly what I did. When I tightened, it's a great example here. When I did the wire management and I pulled the cables taut, the cable, if you look, is still on the optical drive, but it's on a little crooked. And you don't want to do anything with the power on, so I'm just going to tap the power button, and it's no different than going through the normal shutdown routine by using the mouse. That light's going to go off, these fans are going to stop. Good. Now I can reach in here, push that cable on. There we go. Something as simple as that, right there, just that easy, is that here's what happens. Customer gets it, says, my optical drive doesn't work. What do you mean? Well, I'm trying to put a disk in it. Oh, you can't put a disk in. So when a customer says it doesn't work, I don't know. Does it mean he's putting disks in he can't read? What kind of disks? CDs, DVDs? What are they? Is he trying to record? Is he trying to read? I hate that doesn't work description. I need more information. So now we finally figured out, okay, so it's maybe the first thing we need to check is power. I need you to remove the side panel from the case. Customer might be thinking, wait a minute, I just ordered this. Should I have to take it apart already? And I'll be saying, well, you know, things sometimes shift around in shipping. In this case, I would have never known. I might have falsely assumed it happened in shipping, which is why you need to check as much as possible, unless you enjoy getting calls like that from your customers. But that's all that took. And I should have noticed it when I went to my PC. All I had was C and D, right? I had the C drive and the D drive, which is, the D drive is the 4 terabyte storage. The E is the optical drive, and it wasn't even on the list. So let me go grab that DVD drive, because I'm sure that's what that is. It's probably the Bluetooth driver, since the Wi-Fi driver's working. And I don't see the Bluetooth logo. Here we go. Some of you would say, well, why not go online and download the driver? These days, the drivers are all pretty solid. It's hard to tell in performance and reliability an old driver from a new one unless it's brand new technology. You know, if it's technology that has just come out, like Ryzen related stuff, then you definitely want to get those latest drivers. All right, let's run through the setup here real quick. It says install the Asus WLAN card driver, install the Bluetooth driver. So it's actually got a link for each one, which is good. I don't think we really need the wireless LAN driver, because that's working fine. It does add some functionality, but that can make it hard to support because the functionality is unique to Asus. I'd rather just use the ubiquitous Windows built-in functionality, so we're all on the same page. And typically there'll be a little blue Bluetooth icon down here in the corner, which I'm not seeing. And I think that's what the missing device driver is. I could be wrong, but it's as good a place as any to start. Let's take a look. Yeah, now we have the little Bluetooth icon down here. And if I go back to Device Manager, and I just realized that from process of elimination, I didn't need to run a PCI lookup or anything off the codes, which is a bit complicated. I don't want to get into that. So now everything is as it should be. I also like to make sure, I like to go to Advanced Settings and turn off the auto reboot on error. What'll happen is the computer, if it blue screens, you'll get a blue screen and it'll restart, and you won't be able to read the blue screen. It'll happen too quickly. That's the default of how Windows installs, from Windows XP through Windows 10. So I've got to go to Startup and Recovery and click on the Settings button. And right down here it says automatically restart is normally checked. So apparently I was pretty thorough when I was installing the OS and I unchecked that. When this if this ever blue screens, I want it to freeze on the blue screen and stay that way until the customer powers it off or hits the reset button. That way the customer can call me and say, my computer's not working. Here we go with not working again. What do you mean? Well, it's got a blue screen. What does the blue screen say? I don't know, it just flashed and restarted. Now I'll get the call, I'll say, what does the blue screen say? And they can read it because it stays there on the screen the whole time. Then I can advise them based on that information. And that information is critical. It's not just random jibber jabber. It might be to you, but I assure you that information is critical to understanding what the problem is and how to fix it. I don't know why Microsoft just defaults to resetting. That makes no sense to me, but that's why I don't work for Microsoft, I guess. So now everything is good, everything's working as it should. We can shut this back down. And this can go back in the motherboard box. There used to be a time when we had to burn computers in because the quality control just wasn't, there was a lot of components on a motherboard. A lot of things can go wrong. These days, motherboards have very few components. A lot of things are now built into one chip. And the quality control is, I think, much better because each chip then is quality controlled before it goes into the motherboard, which is then quality controlled again. Basically, if you can install Windows without an error, you're pretty well through a burn-in. Now, back in the day when you were installing Windows 3.1 or even maybe Windows 95, it became a bit challenging to realize whether or not you had a system that was functional until you really pushed a load on the memory and pushed a load on the CPU. And that sometimes happens today, but it's pretty darn rare. For the most part, if it starts and installs Windows correctly and you can get all your drivers installed without any errors, you're probably just going to be fine. Like I said, there are exceptions to every rule, but burn-in testing today, for the most part, doesn't need to happen. We used to power machines on for 24 hours in the factory as a burn-in test, and I would say 10% of them failed. Like, they appeared to be running fine when we left at night, and they had errors when we came in the morning. These days, if we were to still do that, we would set them up at night, and they would just be running in the morning, and it would be once. I mean, I guess it depends how many systems you're building, but if you're doing, let's say, 10 a day, and you're going to run the process 5 days a week at the end of the day, let's say on Friday you let it run over the weekend, so those get a real thorough burn-in, you will very rarely come across a machine that fails that burn-in if you got Windows and drivers installed without a problem. So the burn-in, we still, and I've talked about this before, there's a lot of guys in the business that have been in the business as long as I have that still do things the way we used to do them. There's certainly a lot of things I still do more or less the same, but there's other things where I've adapted and said, okay, we don't have to do this anymore. You know, defragmenting hard drives doesn't really need to be done anymore. You certainly don't want to defragment a solid state drive or a memory card. There's no benefit to that. There's a certain kind of defragmenting that Windows likes to do automatically in the background, regardless if it's an SSD. That's fine. It's not harmful. It's not the same kind of defragmentation. They still call it defragmentation, but it's the technology has changed. The way NTFS works is not the same as the way FAT16 or FAT32 used to work. And if you don't know what those words are, and if that's just gibberish to you, it's nothing you need to worry about apart from just let Windows do what Windows wants to do to take care of itself. I'm just going to give this a little autograph here. I think I'll just put it's a silver Sharpie. You can barely see it. This is, what is this, the 10th? There we go. And that's well hidden on the inside. Now this panel always goes on easy. There's really nothing to interfere with it. However, you still got to get all the tabs in the slots. Yep, that looks good. And I got to get the thumb screws that'll be in this motherboard box here somewhere. Bring it into the light. It's hard to see over there. Sometimes I take the thumb screws out and I just place them in a little bowl. When I'm working on multiple computers, it's hard to know which ones go where. It may not even matter, but that's just part of the way I am. I want all the original parts that came with the case. I guess I'm going to take some things out, so I am not seeing them. Oh, there's one. Lots of case badges. Okay, I know there's one more in here. It's got to be in with all the manuals. It must have rolled. Nothing there. Ah, there it is. Got it. All right, so there's our thumb screws. This stuff can go back in. I want to put that antenna on top. I want the customer to definitely see that antenna, because if the only way they have to hook this up to the internet is through Wi-Fi, they're going to get a really low signal without that antenna. Okay, I think I'm done going in and out of this box. Done with these power cables. And this should be the last two screws I have to turn. just to secure this cover into position. And they couldn't be more out of my way. You can see, even with this big space I have to work with at the kitchen, it quickly becomes a small, tight space. There we go. Bingo. Let me move this stuff over here just so I'm just starting to feel a little locked in here. So another thing I like to do before I ship the customer the computer is to just clean it up. You know, it's been handled around, my hands get dirty, fingerprints get left. And what I recommend for cleaning the outside of the computer is just some Windex. Don't spray the Windex on the computer. Spray it on a paper towel, and then use that paper towel to wipe it clean. We can get all those fingerprints off. Any dust that might have settled on it, well, it's been here in the shop patiently waiting to be finished. We'll get all that off. Customers ordered it new. It is new. It should look like new. Make sure none of my dog's hairs are on it. It's not very professional. And of course, don't forget to wipe your face, or in this case, your computer's face. Let me move that dongle out of the way. Let's get that wiped down. Now you notice lately I haven't been putting on any stickers. The internet was in such a hubbub over Stickergate on one of my builds that I kind of thought about it. And because everybody's different about the feeling of these stickers, I now put the stickers in the box and the customer can apply them where and when they want to, if they want to. And let's see, one more boot up, I think, just to make sure everything still works. It's very quiet. Guess I can put my pen away. Yeah, that BIOS does take a while to come up. That is just normal on an X99. Boom, now you can start your timing, as far as I'm concerned, as how long the OS takes to load, rather than just from counting when you hit the power button, which is normally how I do it. Just kind of feel it's not fair with this build. Why do I have an extra dongle? Oh, because I threw that other mouse out and this is a spare dongle. Okay, that can go in the drawer. Talking to myself, don't mind me. All right, do I have all my drives this time? C drive, D drive, E drive, check. Wi-Fi is there. Bluetooth is there. Speaker is there. USB here works. What about over here? Can I plug into this USB? Will it still work? Let's plug it in here. Yep, that USB works. Unplug. Got nothing. So clearly that's working. I've already tried the memory card reader. That works. I like this NZXT card reader. Some folks have written to me saying it's had bad reviews, but you know, not every company makes everything perfect. I'm sure that they've had a few bad ones roll off. I can't imagine why this would stop working. I'm very happy with it. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this NZXT card reader. It's a full size 5 1/4 inch, which is pretty hard to find these days. And the holes match the holes in the case. It's close enough, so it really looks like it belongs there. And most of these card readers, they look like an afterthought after you've installed them. And that's the build. That's the X99, ready to rock and roll and be put to work. I'm gonna go ahead and just power that bad boy off. And that's gonna wrap up this build video, because now I gotta get it in the box and drive over to the FedEx store and get it shipped off to Tennessee, where this customer will hopefully receive it by Wednesday or Thursday. And when I ship, remember, I always ship the computer in its original box laying flat in another box. And when it's laying flat, always make sure the video card is facing the ground so it's not hanging upside down. And that's the secret to shipping a computer with a heavy graphics card installed, where you know, people are worried the graphics card's going to fall out. Don't ship it the way, you know, when your case gets shipped to you, it's just typically, you know, it's an empty case in a pretty thin box. That's why it's important to double box and to force the computer laying down flat with the address label on top, so that if the delivery driver were to move that case in any other direction, they wouldn't be able to see the label of where it's going. So anyway, there it is, another build wrapped up. Let me just jump in the chat. I'll see what your comments are before I say my final goodbye. I have to hook everything back up, so give me just a minute here as I rotate my stuff around and figure out how to not strangle myself with these cables. Move that over there. Need my keyboard and mouse to be plugged back in. Okay. I didn't copy over the parts list. Let me do that now while I'm thinking about it. A lot of people are asking what are the parts because they failed to watch part 1 and part 2. If you click on part 1 or part 2 now or later, the part list is all there. Every part is individualized in detail. And I just basically have to go into this is all part of the administrative part of doing a YouTube video. I really don't like this part. It's just basically copying, pasting, but it's just the idea that I had to create it to begin with, which is listing every single part and links to those parts and everything you see in the video. People want to know, where'd you get that turntable wood spinny thing? It's called the Lazy Susan, so I gotta put that in there. Where do you buy your shirts? I mean, anything I show on the video, there's always somebody out there, you know, where'd you get that stove? It has nothing to do with the topic of the video. People just ADHD, man. They're just all over the place. All right, so I've just added all the parts list into the description of this video. You should see it now if you click on the description of the video. All the parts are listed that make up this build, and I'll just read it out loud to you since a lot of people just prefer to be spoon-fed. So we've got a Corsair Carbide Series 300R case combined with an Asus tough Sabertooth x99 motherboard with an Intel Core i7-6900K CPU. We're using a Noctua NHD14 6 heat pipe dual radiator CPU cooling fan with Ballistix Sport LT 32 gig RAM kit. That's 4 sticks that are 8 gigs each of memory. That's DDR4 2400 speed. The video card is an EVGA GeForce GTX 1080 SC. That means super clocked. Gaming ACX. ACX is the cool and quiet technology from EVGA. It's got 8 gigs of GDDR5X RAM on the graphics card. The solid state drive is a Samsung 960 EVO, not the 960 Pro, but the 960 EVO. It's 1 terabyte in capacity. It's an M.2 NVMe drive, combined with a Seagate 4 terabyte BarraCuda SATA 6 gig, obviously, 64 meg cache storage mechanical drive. The optical drive is an Asus 24X DVD reader writer. It's SATA. It's just an OEM, so when you buy it, it just comes in a plastic bag. There's no instructions, there's no cables, there's no box. You're saving money when you buy it that way because you're not paying for all that stuff you shouldn't need. The memory card reader, as I mentioned, it's an NZXT. It's called an APERTURE M all-in-one 5¼ inch bay multimedia mesh style card reader with dual USB 3.0. So because of that, this computer has 4 USB 3.0 ports in the front, and it's got 2, 4, looks like 6 USB 3.0s in the back with 4 USB 2.0s on top of that. So we're looking at a total of 14 USB ports, which should accommodate even the heaviest user. The Wi-Fi adapter you just saw me plug in is an Asus 802.11ac wireless AC 1200 with Bluetooth 4.0. The power supply is a Corsair RM750X fully modular power supply that is rated 80 plus gold certified for power efficiency. And of course, we're running Windows 10. This is the Pro version, and of course, it's got to be 64-bit. And the total cost on this system, as of about a week ago, was $3,300. That's just rounding it. It might have been a little bit more than that. I also have links to the manual screwdriver, which is this yellow-handled one. This only sells for about $7. I think everybody should have one of these if you're going to be building a computer. It comes with no bits. Get yourself a Phillips number 1 and Phillips number 2 bit from your local hardware store. They're about $1 a piece. And you can even get the flat edge bits too, and open up the handle and stick it inside your handle. And then of course, the Panasonic EY7410. I've talked about this driver in the past. This is fairly expensive, about $160 for this driver. I build a lot of computers, so I can justify it. If you're only going to build one, you probably don't need this. You're not going to worry about things like carpal tunnel and things like that, and that somebody who does it for a living has to. So it's more of a tool, an investment for somebody who's going to use it a lot. If you're only going to use it once or twice, then just get a regular mechanic. Save your money. And then the 22-inch Lazy Susan here, there's a link to that at Amazon. I actually tried finding one of these, and the ones I purchased were about 4 inches smaller, and a 4 inches diameter is quite a lot of space, and so things weren't fitting correctly. I couldn't use it on a lot of cases. And you'll see even this case just barely fits. I mean, it goes edge to edge right through the center. This was sent to me by one of my viewers, and that was mentioned in previous videos. I've talked about it at least 4 times now, so now we'll make it 5. And there's the link to that. And is that it? And that's the list. That's the list of everything there. And I hope you enjoyed the build series. Again, this doesn't have the close-ups or the detail in the wiring that I've done traditionally in my older videos. So if you're a first-time builder, or this is one of my first videos you've ever seen, I highly recommend you watch any of the non-live build videos, the regular build videos that don't have the word live in the title. And there's about 4 or 5 weeks of work on each one to make those 2-hour videos to get all those separate close-up shots and angles, as well as fully explaining not only what those parts do, but why I'm plugging them in a certain way or running cables a certain way, so that if you have parts that are different, which I hope you do, that you've designed yourself, that you don't necessarily follow what I'm doing exactly, but that you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, so that you can understand what you have to do for your system to be built optimally. I've seen a lot of people build computers that make an assumption they built them correctly because the machine turns on. Computers today are pretty forgiving. You can have the RAM in the wrong sockets. You can have your video card in a wrong socket. When I say wrong, I mean non-optimal. And what that will result in is a computer that boots and works, and it'll probably still be fast compared to whatever you're replacing it with, but not as fast as it could be, and you wouldn't know the difference. So that's why I explain all that in my videos, and why the RAM goes into certain sockets, why the video card goes into a certain socket, and how to optimize everything to make sure that you're getting all the performance that you're paying for. There's nothing funnier to me than somebody who has overclocked a machine where they don't even have the RAM and the CPU in the right socket, or not the CPU, they don't have the RAM and the GPU in the optimal sockets. So if you really care about the most performance, these are the little details, and it's not rocket science. It's just paying attention to the little details. You don't have to get all technical and geeky about talking about how many lanes there are in each socket, or x16 times x8. You don't have to understand why, for the most part, unless you want to be a computer technician. If you're just building your own computer, just follow the steps as I demonstrate them in my video for the reasons I explained, and you will build it correctly, I promise you. And I think that's about going to wrap it up. Let's see what folks, one more time, let's see what we have to say in the chat. Someone says, I got a Phillips head screwdriver with a magnetic tip for $1. Yeah, the screwdrivers are not very expensive. I'm looking through the comments right now. Carey, do you record the serial numbers of the components? No, I'm not selling the components. The components are purchased by the customer and belong to the customer. So any problem the customer has with the components is between the customer and the manufacturer, not with me. I think there's a little issue with the feed there. Yeah, I was debating whether or not to film this last part because it's just the little stuff. You know, the main thing I think most people are concerned about is how to seat all the parts correctly and, you know, go through that first power on it. When it gets to the cable management or installing a Wi-Fi card, anybody can really do that. But I thought, oh, what the heck, I got to do the work anyway. Why not turn the camera on? And even though you don't get the close-ups, you at least get the idea of the amount of time that it takes and what's going through my mind when I do it. Now that this build is done, as soon as I can get it shipped out, I can start working on the Xenos build. But again, if you did not donate to the Xenos project, it's still going to be a while before you see it. The process will be that I'll be building it in pieces and sections. Those sections will then be sent to Xenos to verify that I haven't said anything incorrect or that I haven't got any facts wrong or that I wasn't doing something incorrectly, so I can correct it. Then that video, upon approval or any corrections, will be exclusively available to the folks who financed it. And then once all the pieces are done, it'll all be assembled into one big video and it'll be released publicly. So it's going to be a while, if you're not a donator, before you see the build, but it is the next build scheduled to start. It could start tomorrow. Grant says, cheers for the video. I like the build. Thank you, Grant. I appreciate that. Am I going to be commissioning any more inspired by tags? So I had these little metal stickers that said inspired by CareyHolzman, and I just had a friend of mine make them up for me. It was just kind of a one-time thing. I don't plan on doing that anymore. It's very time-consuming to have to address envelopes and go to the post office and buy a bunch of stamps, special stamps for shipping worldwide versus shipping in the U.S. Different issues with weight, depending. Some people were ordering 4 or 5 of these little metal plates. To put them in one envelope, the envelope then wouldn't bend. It couldn't go through the machine properly. So it had to be handled by hand. It makes the postage go up. That's a lot of work for a $2 tag, you know, for me to be. I'd rather spend my time making videos rather than stuffing envelopes and heading to the post office waiting in line. I do appreciate the enthusiasm. There's got to be a better way, more efficient way. And when you subtract the cost of the stamp and the cost of the envelope and the cost of the tag on a $5, I think they were $5 donation, I might have walked away with, after putting all that work in, of maybe $1.50 profit. It really depended. If it was worldwide, the stamp was more money. Anyway, it was just a temporary thing. I'm not intending on doing that, but I do intend on doing something else, something where maybe I can kind of contract it out. Someone wants to know if I'd ever do a collab video with Linus Tech Tips. It's not really practical. I would probably do a collab video with just about any YouTuber that wanted to do one. I just really haven't been offered. So in the times where I've recommended it or suggested it to other YouTube creators, they have not responded. So I'm open to it. However, you know, even if Linus were to say, yeah, let's do something together, not quite sure how the logistics of that would work out. We're very, very far apart, several thousand miles apart from each other. So, you know, if we could do something where I did a video and he did a video and they somehow meshed together, I don't know. But it's not being discussed. He doesn't seem interested. In fact, like I said, no YouTuber that I've talked to has seemed interested. And that's fine, you know. After I've asked 2 or 3 different YouTubers and 2 or 3 times I get ignored, I just stop asking. That's just the way I am. Apparently somebody here missed the very beginning of this video. They want to know if I work from home or if I have a shop. Will this video be made public? I talk about that right in the beginning of the video. Now, do you hate cheesecake forever or what? So this is referring to the cheesecake video I made the other day. No, I don't hate it. I feel like I'm on a quest now to find a cheesecake that's less rich and try it again. I just need something not so rich. It's got to be more mild. I can't help but wonder, you know, sometimes when you hear a song on the radio and you don't really like it, and then you hear it again, and 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 before you know it, you're singing along to it. I can't help but wonder if that part of the brain also works the same way with food. So it's my own little psychological experiment on just better to understand myself and understand if I am consistent, if I'm as much like a robot that I think I am, or if they're just some inexplicable human reactions to things that may be normal that other people also experience, but we really don't acknowledge it or are self-aware enough to recognize that those two things are connected, like eating and music, and that repetition in experiences in life, whether that's food or music or whatever the experience is, does not have some sort of positive effect on deciding the things that we like or don't like. It's my own little psychological experiment, just because I'm curious. Someone's mentioning sugar. So look, people like salt, sugar, and fat. These are the 3 things people like more than anything. And they're addictive, and you know, whether you're eating foods that claim to be low in fat, they're often substituted with salt. So they'll be high in sodium. Low sodium tends to have higher fat content. Trying to find something that has low fat, low salt, no sugar, you end up with a sort of flavorless piece of cardboard. I'm not into that whole paleo diet thing, this idea that you shouldn't eat refined sugars, you should just eat things the way cavemen ate, which is, you know, meat and vegetable, but it's just not processed in any way, shape, or form. I'm okay with food processing. I think there's got to be a balance in all things. People talk about, oh, you shouldn't eat this, it's got this in it, it's got that in it. You know, your body can withstand a lot of different things that are bad for it without any negative effects. What happens is when you overdo it, when you're getting that stuff all the time, every day, or in large quantities all the time, that's where it starts, your body may start to reject it, or it just may be too much for your body to process. Or over time, your body may just start getting tired, like in the case of insulin with sugar. You start wearing things out internally, your organs, you can just actually wear them out. So I'm somebody who wants to enjoy my life, and if that food brings a smile on my face, I'm going to eat it. But you also have to know when to stop. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to eat till you're full. Enjoy your food, live your life, enjoy your life. And that's my philosophy on that. If you like sugar, have sugar. Just restrict how much of it you have. And maybe don't have it every day. It was interesting to me when I did post the cheesecake video how many other people
There wasn't a lot, but there were a handful of other people that said they couldn't stand it either. It is an effort, and as I said in the very beginning of that video, when people have OCD or they have eating disorders, this is generally something that's hidden in an attempt to fit in and not stand out. There's an old Japanese proverb that the nail that sticks out is the one that gets hit with the hammer. You don't want to draw attention to yourself, not certainly for bad eating or for OCD. That is, again, mostly something that is hidden. People with Asperger's disease and things like that are, generally speaking, geniuses at hiding that from people around them. Many people around them would never know that they have this internal struggle. And I'm just trying to break that glass ceiling and say, it's okay to talk about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't know if I have Asperger's or if I don't. I really don't know. And I don't care. And the reason I don't care about that is it's not an excuse. I don't get to say, well, let's just say I had it. I don't get to excuse bad behavior and go, well, I can act badly because I have this or that. And I see too much of society using their diagnosis as an excuse. But that diagnosis just means you have to try harder than other people at certain things. That's all that means. And so for me, sometimes being in places, as I mentioned, where they're very, very crowded is a challenge for me, or eating certain foods, a lot of certain foods, it's a challenge. And when I get placed into that situation, it's very uncomfortable. And what's happened to me in the past is, family would get together for Thanksgiving, and there's a big feast of food. And I would just have some slices of white meat turkey and a roll, and people would say, well, look at your plate, it's bare. Look, everybody else is eating. You need to eat too. Have some cranberry sauce, have some stuffing, have some whatever. And I don't want it. And all eyes are on me. Suddenly I'm the focus of attention. Leave me alone. Can't I just leave me alone? Just let me enjoy my meal. That's what I want. And because they don't leave me alone, the next year, I go, you know what, I'm busy. I've got other plans. I'm not going to join everybody for Thanksgiving this year. And then I hear, well, Carey's just all too good for us now. He's too good to join us. What did I do? I didn't do this on purpose. I can't help it. So when I'm put into the situation, I'm made to feel terrible by others around me. And when I avoid the situation, I'm made to feel terrible by others around me. So the impact and the influence that we all have on each other's lives during this little temporary window of time that we're here, in my opinion, should be more positive, and we shouldn't have to hide and try and fit in. We should be able to say, look, this is what I struggle with, and you should help me and support me, not insult me for it. And everybody has problems with something. I guarantee you, there's no such thing as normal. So we all have these things we hide. You watching this, you have it too. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell. You can come out when you want to come out, if you want to come out, about whatever it is you struggle with. And I think one of the first things that's going to open your eyes is you're not alone. And I think that's the biggest step in, I don't want to call it recovery, but the biggest step in kind of feeling like you can be yourself and you don't have to hide certain things. This is the world we live in right now. There's a lot of pressure to fit in. There's a lot of pressure to conform. And even the people who don't conform, the people who, get the facial piercings and tattoos and things, are almost putting it out there that, hey, look at me, look how different I am. But I'm talking about struggles. I'm not talking about just being different. I'm talking about being different in a way that is perceived negatively, such that the internal reaction is to hide that away. And many of you did not know I was a fussy eater until I showed that cheesecake video. It was a surprise to most of you. It was supposed to be. I have worked all of my life to hide that. I avoid eating out with friends. I avoid, somebody says, hey, come over for dinner. I avoid it. And the reason I avoid it is people take offense. I'm not going to eat this. Well, I spent all day cooking it. Well, I'm sorry, it's not something I eat. And that creates a huge problem, because there's a failure for them to understand what the struggle is. So, well, I'm not going to sit there and lecture them. I can share this with you, and you can choose to watch it if you want to learn more about it, and hopefully consider that if you know somebody like that in your life, or if you are somebody like that, first of all, that you're not alone, and secondly, that you don't have to make these people feel worse than they already feel about it. Go on, eat it. Go on. It's not going to kill you. That kind of pressure is the worst possible thing. The worst thing you can possibly do. The best thing you can do is go, oh, you don't want that? Good. More for me. That's the best thing you can do. If you change your mind, let me know. That's all you have to do. That's it. It's so much more positive than implying what's wrong with you. How could you not like this wonderful thing? Well, what's wrong with you? How come you don't like heights? Or what's wrong with you? How come you don't like water? Well, you don't know what fun you're missing when you go out on the jet ski. I don't want to go out on a jet ski. It frightens me. Okay. Respect it. That's just the way people are. Everybody's got their thing. I don't like crowds of people. Well, you're missing out on some great things like Disneyland. No, I've been there. It's not that great. So, I'm a thrill seeker. If there's a roller coaster that flips around 18 times, I'm on it. That may be the last thing you want to go on. And then how would you like it? Come on, get on there. You're missing a great time. You have no idea how fun that is. It wouldn't be fun necessarily for you. Well, it's the same with food. It is absolutely no different. I've jumped out of an airplane at 13,000 feet. Would you do it? I'm sure some of you have. To some of you, no way. What is it they say? I won't jump out of a perfectly good airplane. You got to be crazy. I loved it. Loved it. I think everybody should have to jump out of an airplane, because that really makes you feel alive like nothing else. However, the vast majority of us will never jump out of an airplane, and you don't know what you're missing. And that's exactly what it feels like when somebody says, you need to try this hummus. You don't know what you're missing. Good. Ignorance is bliss. I'm happy with that. So anyway, someone said I'm in Yoda mode. Yeah, well, you got me on my soapbox on that subject. I've struggled with this, struggled and fought. It's just like torture. For 49 years, I've been born this way. My mother said, I thought people like you were made that way, they're raised that way. She says, you came out of the womb like that. That's just the way you were. You wouldn't let certain people hold you. You'd throw a fit. My siblings don't have this problem. Nobody else in my family has this problem. It is unique to me. And the very fact that I'm identifying it as a problem is part of the problem, if that makes any sense. One of the best quotes I've ever heard was, the main problem that you may have is that you're convinced you have a problem. And once you can get past that and realize it's not a problem, there may be nothing to fix. However, in my case, it's a matter of just trying to not have the fears and the anxieties of somebody inviting me over for dinner and me having to think of an excuse why I can't do that. Because ultimately, I will insult them unintentionally through not eating probably whatever it is they're going to cook. It's highly unlikely they're making anything I'm going to eat. Unless it's steaks, unless it's maybe a pizza, pretty much I'm not going to like it. Maybe it's chicken. But even then, when people make these things, they often make a lot of sides, or they dress it in a certain way, and that's it, I'm out. And so rather than make somebody feel like their cooking isn't good enough, I just simply find a reason not to go. So that's a choice. I'm sure many of you have done it. There may be many of you that do that as often as I do it for the same reason I do it. And it just isn't something you really hear anybody talk about. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. And I will talk about it again. I'll probably move it all over to the food channel that I've got, the Cooking with Carey. There I'll explore the psychology of it, at least from my perspective, and explore that and see where it takes me. In the meantime, I think that will finish up this build, even if we got a little off track on it. I appreciate you guys joining me, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Until then, bye for now.